Welcome to Conversations with B'nai B'rith International. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. Thank you for spending some time with us today. We're here today to talk about the 50th anniversary of B'nai B'rith senior housing. In 1971, B'nai B'rith opened our first sponsored building for low-income seniors. Today, our network comprises 38 buildings located all over the United States, serving about 5,000 people, making us the largest national Jewish sponsor of subsidized housing in the U.S., in a partnership with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. The mission of B'nai B'rith Senior Housing is to provide seniors with quality, affordable housing in a secure, supportive community environment, without regard to religion, race, or national origin, in order to maximize their independent and dignified lifestyle. Today, we're joined by three people who have been the bedrock of our housing program. Marvin Siflinger, chair of the Center for Senior Services, Mark Olshan, Associate Executive Vice President of B'nai B'rith International and Director of the Center, and Janel Doughten, Associate Director of the Center for Senior Services. Welcome to you all. So Marvin, let's begin with you. As the chair of the Center for Senior Services, can you talk about your role with our housing network, and what is the role of the Senior Housing Committee?
The role of the Senior Housing Committee is to assure that the quality of life of our residents across the country are as helpful, as enriching as they possibly can be. And that response has really two parts. One, to assure that the physical building is in the best possible shape, and that the maintenance activities are at a premier level. The second, within the framework of each development's operating budget, is to make sure that appropriate social services are in place so that our residents, who are obviously elderly, have access to those activities, be it healthcare, be it, in this time, the ability to deal with the pandemic, the aggressive nature of our folks to help our residents achieve vaccinations as quickly as possible. So in every aspect of their lives, our community, our B'nai B'rith community, is helping to make the lives of our seniors as good as it possibly can be.
Mark, this one is for you. At B'nai B'rith, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the senior housing program. Talk about the history of the program and how it first started, and in your opinion, what makes our properties special? And to begin, what was it that the volunteer leaders of B'nai B'rith were thinking about at that time, back probably in the late 60s, in terms of the need to provide this kind of service to the community?
Well, as we all know, Dan, B'nai B'rith is a service organization. And there were a group of dedicated volunteers, many of whom were involved in the building trades. They were the lawyers, developers, real estate professionals. And they really wanted to, because they saw a need in these communities, they wanted to provide quality, affordable senior housing in their communities under the auspices of B'nai B'rith. They also recognized that they had no money locally, and the organization didn't have any real money to provide for these programs, but they wanted to do something. So they petitioned the Board of Governors, which was the governing body of the organization at the time, to allow them to pursue this. Now, at that time, there happened to be federal programs available that provided money to local not-for-profit corporations to make that type of program happen. And so it was perfect for B'nai B'rith. It was the local community group, the local lodges and their units, working through our national office to help submit applications under the auspices of B'nai B'rith. The government provided the money. The local B'nai B'rith group provided what we call the sweat equity to actually make it happen. It was perfect for the feds, and they loved the program. It was the marriage of local boards of directors responding to the flavor of that community and working through a Washington-based national not-for-profit in Washington, providing oversight and coordination. So it was perfect, the national-local partnership. The national office could also work with HUD, with congressional offices, to help monitor, strengthen, and provide oversight to the programs. And the first building that B'nai B'rith opened after submitting an application in the late 60s was, as you mentioned, in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania in early 1971. And so the B'nai B'rith Housing Network, as we call it, was born. It's now grown, as you mentioned, to the largest national Jewish sponsor of HUD-assisted affordable housing in the United States. And as Marvin mentioned, it's governed by a senior housing committee that represents the various boards of directors of the properties around the country. As far as what makes the program special, in my mind, it's the variety of training programs and guidelines and local oversight that's provided by the national office, but also keeping that local involvement at the local level, which reflects the needs and the specific goals of that particular community. So it's the local involvement of the individual boards of directors, keeping the programs locally, meeting the needs of local residents that make the program special. A number of other national not-for-profits got into the business, but they did it from a national cookie cutter kind of an approach, where they did the same model over and over and over and over again. And that, for HUD, it always worked, but they actually liked our process better. And that's what I think what makes our program more special, because we have those local individual community members working at the local level, meeting those local needs. And that's what really is the strength, I think, of the program. It creates a uniqueness at the individual levels, but with a national structure governed by the national Washington office.
Well, the next question is for each of you. While the history of our housing network has been marked by opening senior housing properties over the years, preservation will play a big role in the future. What steps do you think over the next few years and in the future will B'nai B'rith take to ensure that the buildings can remain open to the next generation of residents? Marvin, why don't we start with you, and then Mark, and then Janel on this question.
Well, that is Dan, in so many ways, the perfect question, because our primary concern is to make sure that these developments remain as quality, resident-oriented buildings in perpetuity, if that's possible. So we have already embarked upon we think, significant preservation program using the latest tools that are provided by the federal government. And our objective, to the extent that's possible, is to work in partnership with the local B'nai B'rith organizations, the organizations that Mark just mentioned, to provide the resources through the federal low-income housing tax credit program and other subsidy programs to completely make over the buildings, to replace the elevators, the kitchens, the bathrooms, etc., improve the community rooms, to assure the highest quality of life for the residents, to bring in state-of-the-art social service activities so that our residents are able to age in place as much as possible. We have examples already of that concept brought into execution in our development in Claymont, Delaware, in the Bronx, New York, and we're working on 6 other different developments now to apply to the federal government, to HUD, and state agencies, which now play a major part in this process, in helping these developments be upgraded for future, not only future residents, but the current residents. So we think with the assistance of our local partners that we now have the right formula to rehabilitate the developments to a great extent.
Mark, you've been working on this very concept of preservation and as Marvin says, in perpetuity. Tell us about your take on this and how you see the future.
Well, as we kid in the office, although it's not kidding, it's a serious conversation, but back in the day, there were significant resources available for senior housing. There was a federal housing policy in place. There was a recognition that people, as they got older, needed someplace that they could call home that was affordable. There was a conscious effort to maintain programs available for these populations. As the federal pie continued to get smaller and smaller, a variety of these programs started to fall by the wayside. We no longer have a federal housing policy. It's now kind of catch as catch can in many ways. Through a lot of efforts of groups like ours, we're attempting to get a little bit back in. But given the lack of federal monies to develop more affordable housing, even as the need certainly continues to grow, because every day more and more people turn 65, 70 years old and require that kind of support. We now, as Marvin mentioned, we are in the housing preservation business. And we need to ensure that our current stock that we've put up over the last 30, 40 years will continue to last for the next numbers of residents, both living there now as well as for the next 20, 30, 40 years. So we've taken on that program in order to try to do that. So what we've taken on is what we call the new house philosophy to our current network. It's a complete recapitalization of the existing program, the existing financing, a complete rebuilding of the physical plant, and in a sense, creating a new building that will last 30, 40 years, as opposed to fixing up the old buildings as they begin to require certain things to get fixed. So it's the kind of the concept of, instead of fixing the broken windows every time they break, you just simply take care of all of it all at once, redo all the sashes and all the other infrastructure, so that you don't have to worry about kind of fixing it up as you go along. You do it all at once, and you develop literally a brand new facility. This also ensures that there are significant dollars locally. There's monies available for the continuance of the property, and there's significant dollars to put aside for services and programs for the residents who live there now and who will be living there in the next 20, 30, 40 years. And this, I think, is really very important. We're also wanting to maintain these programs, as Marvin said, in perpetuity as affordable housing for low-income seniors under the auspices of B'nai B'rith. And most importantly for me is to honor the legacy and the hard work of the original members of the board of directors locally that made it happen, because they're the ones who put all that sweat equity in at the beginning, and we don't want that to go away. We want to memorialize those individuals and what they did early on in order to make it happen in that community. So that, for me, is one of the most important things of maintaining these programs going forward.
Well, it sounds really like we've got to look at this in 2 parts. One is the preservation aspect. The other is, and you've mentioned it, and that is looking at the broadening bandwidth of seniors in this country. Now, in the Jewish community alone, you have a community that lives longer. It's a very large proportion of our population in this country, but that's true in terms of aging. It's true across the board, maybe not as much as where we are. So looking at new possibilities in terms of federal programs, federal funding, of course, I know that you and our staff spend a lot of time trying to promote that idea and to get that back on track. Janel, any comments on this before I turn to another specific question to you? I'm going to ask the question, but please, if you would, weigh in on the issue of preservation as well. Let's turn to the current residents and staff. At B'nai B'rith, we like to say that we're more than just bricks and mortar, and the work does not end once the ribbon is cut and residents move into a new building. Describe the relationship between the Center for Senior Services and the buildings we oversee, and what type of services exactly does CSS provide to each building?
Well, I think kind of what Mark and Marvin were saying, we see ourselves as partners with each of our buildings on the level of the board of directors, the local board of directors, and the on-site staff, and even the residents. So what we bring to, the services we provide, we're not managing the day-to-day operations of the buildings. What we bring is, the all of B'nai B'rith and the network. So we provide training. We have a couple of training meetings a year, one for our on-site staff, that's the management staff and the service coordinators. We have another annual conference that brings together those management staff and the boards of directors, really to learn from each other. I think that's part of what the network brings, so that they can support each other and learn from each other. As Mark said, each of our buildings is different. We have buildings that are 2 buildings with 150 units each, and then we have some buildings that are 40 units each. So they do have differences, but in reality, we see the same things going on in each building. It's just whether it's 150 residents or 40. So bringing those training conferences, and we listen to them. We do a weekly Zoom with our on-site staff. We started that at the beginning of the pandemic, and actually it's been really successful. We have most buildings participate because what it brings is we'll talk about, some of the developments with HUD or other federal agencies. That's really what part of what we also bring to the network is kind of that expert. We wade through the weeds of all these HUD directives that are coming out and can explain them because our managers, our on-site staff are really busy with what's going on with the pandemic. And actually we're doing vaccination clinics in our buildings right now. And that was something that we advocated through the industry groups and partners to get our independent living buildings part of this CDC vaccination program. So the pharmacies are actually coming to our buildings, working with management staff to put together, appointments. So we've heard about all the crazy ways people have had to get appointments for vaccinations. We're able to do that in these buildings, but we were able to, advocate that our buildings as independent living should be part of these nursing home and assisted living buildings that are getting early access to the vaccinations, because our residents do qualify. So we worked with our buildings to make sure they knew about that. It was through Health and Human Services. So, and how to actually fill out the form, sent the links, and all of our buildings that decided they wanted to be part of that were part of that. And most of our residents are vaccinated now. But these are things we were able to bring that to our buildings instead of them having to hear about it from somebody else or not even know about it, because some of these programs, we have early access to the information. So I think the advocacy, as Mark and Marvin mentioned, is really important too. And our connections We have people at HUD that we can talk to so we can troubleshoot. If a building's having an issue, they can't get hold of somebody at HUD. That's been a real issue, especially this past year since HUD pretty much moved most of their staff to working from home. So it's been some of that, our national connections. We also, my colleague Evan Carmen and I have a couple of calls later on today. One's on Zoom. We meet with congressional staffers that represent our buildings to make sure, one, they know that they have this building in their district or in their state, but also to, as Mark and Marvin were mentioning before, some of the programs to preserve our housing. We always advocate that. We advocate for other federal programs that help our residents as well. Most people have heard of food stamps, generally called SNAP. We always advocate for that. Most of our residents are eligible for SNAP and different things like that. Social Security, whatever we can do to enhance the lives of our residents and to support and help our staff and our boards support those residents, because the goal is aging in place, to keep our residents living there as long as possible.
Speaking of services, many of the buildings have service coordinators who work in the building. What is service coordination and why is that so important to the residents?
Well, Mark likes to talk about the origins of the service coordination program. And the really great thing is that B'nai B'rith was part of the original advocacy to bring service coordinators into the building. So the service coordinators originally referred residents to services that might help them age in place. And it has kind of morphed into case management. So we have residents in our buildings that, maybe they have diabetes. So the service coordinator, makes sure that, there's programming that centers around diabetes, because we have probably a large amount of our residents do have that. So they have they take a holistic approach in some ways, but also connecting residents. It may be that with diabetes, they now have glaucoma, so they can't see well. So even recognizing that they need some help and organizations to come in that help with low vision or maybe cleaning. Maybe they need cleaning services. And that's a great partnership with our local boards that they fundraise, and they can fundraise potentially for things that, Medicare, Medicaid, building operations can't pay for. So even if it's subsidizing or outright paying on a needs basis for cleaning in an apartment. So there's all sorts of things that they can do as partnerships. And what's really great is bringing the network together so that each of the boards learns this. They might be able to adapt something like that to their buildings and the specific needs of their residents. Transportation is another issue in some of our locations. Our Arizona buildings in Tucson, if you've ever been to Tucson, there's not a whole lot of public transportation. But if you go to some of our other buildings, like in Allentown, Pennsylvania, they have a bus stop right in front of their building. So the flexibility of those boards being able to, coming from the B'nai B'rith background and the volunteer background, fundraising for things, it might be to pay for Uber or even fundraise and get a bus for the building. So B'nai B'rith brings that expertise, not just in the housing too. And I think that's part of it too, is that B'nai B'rith has a whole lot of other community service programs that we do and we can tap into. During the pandemic, we have been in contact constantly with Center for Community Action, that they've been able to get some of their community partners to assist our buildings. Our building in Queens, the only grocery store close to the building, closed down temporarily. I have a feeling they had a bunch of staff probably that tested positive for COVID-19. So the residents couldn't get food. This is in New York. This was in the spring when everything was shut down, and even transportation was an issue. So Center for Community Action, we talked to them, Rhonda Love in our Center for Community Action office, and she was able to call on some of our community partners they were able to deliver food for our residents. I mean, it's like that's what we bring.
Well, it sounds like, and it leads into my next question, really. We take very seriously that these buildings are not just apartment buildings, but they're a caring community. And the residents feel comfortable in their homes and have a voice in their building, which, of course, is so important. Now, the Center for Senior Services created the Resident Leadership Retreat to offer resident leaders an opportunity to hone their leadership skills and enhance the overall feeling of community amongst the residents. So tell us about the leadership retreat and how that accomplishes that goal.
Well, and we do like to say, I mean, this is their home. And so we want everyone to feel that sense of community. And props to Mark Olshan. He started this program in 1987. So I realized it's almost 40 years old. It's almost as old as the network itself of our buildings. So early on, it was recognized that B'nai B'rith Perlman Camp would be a great location to take residents to do some programming, intergenerational programming that they could take back to their buildings. And over time, we realized this was such a great opportunity. It used to be a 3-day program that we've expanded it to a week-long retreat. And it's really to give those resident leaders, help them develop, hone their leadership skills, but to take it back to enhance the lives of all the residents. So they learn about what a residents association or a tenants association is. And it's about activities and bringing that kind of stuff to the building and building that sense of community, but also being a voice in their community and learning how to work with management. Instead of every resident complaining about one little thing to management, they can come together and talk to management reasonably. And it actually makes for a more satisfying relationship with management, with their residents as well. But these are their homes. And bringing that sense of community to each other, in the good times, it's great. You can have ice cream socials and talk to management about, whatever's going on in the building. But in tough times, like the pandemic, these residents have really come to support each other. They may be the only people they see because a lot of management staff has had to stay, they may be on site, but they're behind closed doors to minimize exposure. So they're only seeing them talking to them by phone, but they see each other, whether it's even in the hallway, just staying a distance from each other, opening their apartment doors. But residents are taking up the slack from what some of the volunteers or board members would do that can't come into the building right now. So they're helping to deliver meals. They're helping to, work in the food bank. They're assisting the service coordinators with outreach. They're really looking out for each other. And I think because of the residents associations, they really have that sense of community that we really are all in this together. And it's made a difference. And it's also worked well with the whole thing, I wear a mask to protect you, you wear a mask to protect me. They truly feel that. And that's why we really haven't had issues with residents not wanting to wear masks, because they want to help each other.
Dan, can I add?
Sure, go ahead, Marvin.
Just a bit. What Janel, I hope I'm not oversimplifying this, but what Janel has described is a comprehensive communication system in which we learn from each other what the best practices are. And communication, particularly amongst peers, is particularly important. So as I moved, into the B'nai B'rith system, coming from HUD, I was a career HUD employee, and knowing that in the initial years of HUD support for government-assisted housing, the focus of HUD was the buildings only. it was not on the social services. It was not on enhancing the quality of life of the residents. So we at B'nai B'rith can be proud of the fact that it has been a leader in the effort of convincing HUD to approve funding in the operating budgets of these individual buildings, not only B'nai B'rith, obviously, but across the board, across the nation, to provide for the resident services, to have as its mission, one of its missions, key mission, is to enhance the life of the residents. That's a complete turnover from where HUD started. And I know I'm biased, but I think that the B'nai B'rith community does better, obviously, as well as, but better than most in focusing on the quality of life of residents. And I say that because of my experience at HUD, and also because I was the CEO of our state housing finance agency. HUD transferred a lot of authority over to the states in the 1980s. So not only was I a state director of housing, but I was also president of the Association of State Housing Agencies. And I was able to see firsthand what happens in most of these states. So I think B'nai B'rith can be particularly proud of the way it is helpful to its residents. Communications, best practices.
Well, Mark, you initiated, as Janel said, you initiated this about 34 years ago. What was your thinking at the time? I mean, it's one thing to professionalize the operation of buildings, but here you're talking about resident leadership and promoting best practices, bringing people together. What was it that you had in mind when you initiated the program?
Well, honestly, we had no idea what it was going to turn out to be. But the reason how I came about getting involved with this is locally in Montgomery County in Maryland, outside of Washington D.C. We have one of our buildings, Homecrest House in Silver Spring, Maryland, and they were involved with one of the local federation programs, which basically was what they called a vacation program, where they took some residents from various properties and they took them on a vacation for a few days to one of the camps in Pennsylvania. And I heard about it, and I got to know a couple of the professionals involved. And so they asked me if I would join them on one just to see what it was like. And I said, this is terrific. We bring a bunch of older people from the cities, for the most part, up to the mountains, spend a couple days, at camp. Well, I decided this was something we might want to try with our program. And so started talking to our camp director. It was BBYO at the time, and we looked at the camp, and they thought it was terrific. So we started slowly, but I put together a small program for up to 2 people from our buildings, and it was a 3-day program. And what it was really a chance to get out of the area, to get up to a camp experience. Some had never been to camp, and to see what it was like just to get away from the cities and the day-to-day, their day-to-day experiences, and kind of go to camp and become kids again. And so it started out a little bit more along the lines of, let's just give them something fun to do. Well, while we're there, let's also talk about the buildings. We had a number of buildings that had resident associations. Some of the buildings didn't. So we used that as a time to let them talk about how resident associations can be helpful, as Janel was explaining, and how it's progressed over the years. But at the time, there weren't that many of those associations in play. So it helped them kind of talk to each other. I brought in a trainer, a friend of mine, who was a trainer at the time, and she came in and also helped professionalize the training. And it really kind of became something that the residents looked forward to every summer. And it began to grow. And then we started getting more and more participation. And then we would do more and more training we would not just do arts and crafts, take them to the gym, do the exercises and Israeli dancing and all the other fun things, but we started doing a little bit more work on how they become better leaders in their own communities. And that's how it kind of evolved. And then when Gene Fogel of blessed memory came and worked with us, he was involved for a while. Janel took it over, and that, she said, expanded it to this incredible program that it is. And it's just kind of grown from there. But that's how it started. Really, it's just going on a vacation in the woods. And then it just evolved.
Well, we're looking forward to getting COVID behind us so we can get back and bring the folks together again. And there's a lot of anticipation. They look forward to it. The participation is great. The numbers are great. So we're looking forward to that. Marvin, the last question goes to you. Our sponsored buildings across the country are run by individual boards of directors. Talk about the role of the directors and how they play in the oversight and management of the buildings. And how does having a nonprofit mission, a mission-driven board of directors, make a difference as opposed to a for-profit management company?
Well, being nonprofits is particularly important because, as you know, Dan, our mission as Jews is to give back, come along. And we are able to attract across the country some of the best leaders in the real estate industry, in the human resources industry, to give back. And they give back by being leaders of these developments. The boards are primarily involved in the policy of the individual developments, again, with the focus on enhancing quality of life, making sure that the physical plant of the building is at its best. They're planning for the future to make sure, as Janel described in excellent detail, that we're following the best practices. So, in essence, that is the objectives of the board of directors, and we're particularly proud of the leadership qualities of our local boards, and we bring them together. We bring the boards together as well as the management companies together, as Janel described, to make sure that we are achieving the mission. We at B'nai B'rith International have an oversight responsibility. It's a responsibility to our developments. It's a responsibility to the regulatory agencies to make sure that the individual developments are meeting their mission objectives. And and this happens and has happened very occasionally in the 50-year history of B'nai B'rith in the housing industry. If a board is not doing its job, we can intervene, and HUD expects us to intervene and straighten out the situation. So that in essence is what we do. That's in essence what the boards do to make sure that we're living up to this quality standard that is so important to our residents.
Well, you mentioned Tikkun Olam, making the world a better place, repairing the world. You know, a couple of weeks ago, we read in the Torah about the giving of the 10 commandments, and the 5th commandment is honor thy father and thy mother. And what this housing program is exactly that. It is taking that biblical injunction and bringing it down now on a non-sectarian basis, working together with the federal government to honor our fathers and mothers through this tremendous affordable housing program. So we want to wish each of you and our housing program a happy 50th anniversary. We also want to thank all the managers and the staff, and of course all of our volunteers, directors who serve This is a very large enterprise that makes it work, and we're deeply appreciative to all of you. So Marvin, Mark, Janel, thank you so much for all of your work and dedication and for joining us today.
Delighted. Thank you.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Well, huge thanks to Marvin Siflinger, Mark Olshan, and Janel Doughten for giving us insight into B'nai B'rith senior housing as it's evolved and continues to serve so many communities over the past 50 years. Cheers to the next 50. And thank you for tuning into this conversation with B'nai B'rith. Well, if you like what you've heard, make sure you never miss a program by subscribing to the B'nai B'rith YouTube channel and liking us on Facebook. And be sure to visit our website, bnaibrith.org, to learn more about our important work. See you again soon. Take care, everyone.